The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Mercy Heights Medical Center, casting long shadows across the pristine hallways. Olivia Brooks adjusted her nurse's cap and checked her watch as she approached room 314, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. For the past 6 months, this room had become her second home, though the man inside had never once acknowledged her presence. General Jonathan Hayes lay motionless in the hospital bed, his powerful frame diminished by months of unconsciousness. The machines surrounding him beeped steadily, their rhythmic sounds creating a mechanical lullaby that had become the soundtrack to Olivia's daily routine. His dark hair, now longer than any military regulation would allow, framed a face that spoke of strength even in vulnerability. "Good morning, Jonathan," Olivia whispered as she entered the room, her voice carrying the same gentle warmth that had held every single day since she'd first been assigned to his care. She had stopped using formal titles weeks ago, finding that speaking to him like a friend made the long hours feel less lonely. The accident that had brought the distinguished general to this state remained shrouded in mystery. Official reports spoke of a car crash during a business trip, but Olivia had overheard enough conversations between doctors and visitors to know there was more to the story. Whatever had happened, it had left one of America's most successful military contractors fighting for his life in a world of silence. Olivia moved with practiced efficiency, checking his vital signs and adjusting his position to prevent bed sores. Her hands were gentle but sure, shaped by years of nursing training and 6 months of caring for this particular patient. She had developed an intuitive understanding of his needs, noticing the smallest changes in his breathing or the subtle shifts in his facial expressions that others missed. "The weather is beautiful today," she continued, pulling back the curtains to let more light into the room. "Spring is finally here, and the cherry blossoms outside your window are in full bloom. I think you would love to see them." She paused, studying his peaceful face for any sign of response, any flicker that might indicate he could hear her words. "Doctor." Rachel Kim had explained that coma patients sometimes retained awareness even when they couldn't respond, and Olivia had taken this information to heart. Every day brought new stories, updates about the world outside, and readings from books she thought he might enjoy. She had discovered his love for history through the collection of biographies found in his personal effects, and she made sure to bring him tales of great leaders and pivotal moments that had shaped the world. "I brought a new book today," Olivia said, settling into the familiar chair beside his bed. "It's about the Revolutionary War. I thought a military man like yourself might appreciate stories of courage and determination." She opened the leather-bound volume and began to read, her voice filling the quiet room with tales of battle and brotherhood. As she read, Olivia found herself glancing frequently at Jonathan's face. There was something noble about his features, even in repose. His jaw was strong and defined, speaking to years of military discipline. Faint scars along his hands told stories of a life lived fully of challenges faced and overcome. She wondered what kind of man he had been before the accident, what dreams and ambitions had driven him to become one of the youngest generals in American history before transitioning into the business world. The afternoon brought its usual routine of medical procedures and chart updates. Olivia worked with quiet efficiency, but her mind often wandered to the man in her care. She had learned about his business empire through conversations with visitors and newspaper articles left behind by colleagues. Hayes Industries had grown from a small military contracting firm into a billion-dollar enterprise under his leadership, providing advanced technology and support services to armed forces around the world. "Your friend Thomas stopped by yesterday?" Olivia mentioned as she adjusted his IV line. "He seems worried about you, but he also spoke about how proud he is of what you've built together. Said you always believed in taking care of the people who served, making sure they had the best equipment and support possible." These glimpses into Jonathan's character painted a picture of a man driven by purpose rather than mere profit. The more Olivia learned about him, the more she found herself drawn to the person behind the public figure. She began to imagine conversations they might have had under different circumstances, wondering what his voice sounded like when he laughed, or how his eyes might light up when discussing something he was passionate about. Evening brought a different kind of quiet to the medical center. The daytime bustle faded into gentle murmurs and distant conversations. Olivia often stayed past her official shift, reluctant to leave Jonathan alone in the gathering darkness. She would sit beside his bed, sometimes reading, sometimes simply talking about her own life and dreams. "Became a nurse because I wanted to help people heal," she confided one evening, her voice soft in the dimming light. "My father was a veteran who struggled with injuries from his service. The right care could make such a difference in someone's recovery, how compassion could be just as important as medicine." She told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio. It was about her younger brother Daniel, who had followed their father's footsteps into military service, and about her dream of one day opening a clinic that specialized in helping veterans transition back to civilian life. These personal revelations felt natural in the peaceful sanctuary of room 314, as if Jonathan's unconscious presence provided a safe space for her to voice thoughts she rarely shared with others. "Sometimes I wonder if you can hear me," Olivia admitted, reaching out to gently touch his hand. His skin was warm, and she could feel the steady pulse that spoke of life continuing its quiet battle within him. "The doctors say there's always hope that recovery is possible even after months like this. I choose to believe them because the alternative is too heartbreaking to consider." The connection she felt to this unconscious man had grown beyond professional duty into something deeper and more complex. She found herself thinking about him during her time off, wondering if he was comfortable, if the nurses on other shifts were taking proper care of him. Her friends had begun to notice her distraction, but Olivia couldn't explain the pull she felt toward room 314 without sounding foolish or unprofessional. One particularly difficult evening, after dealing with the loss of another patient, Olivia returned to Jonathan's room, seeking the comfort of his peaceful presence. She sat beside his bed and allowed her tears to fall freely, speaking to him as she would to a trusted friend. "I lost Mrs. Henderson today," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She was 93 and had lived such a full life, but it never gets easier watching someone's family say goodbye. This makes me think about how precious each moment is, how we never know what might change everything in an instant. As she spoke, Olivia thought she noticed a slight change in Jonathan's breathing pattern, a subtle shift that made her lean forward with sudden hope. She watched his face intently, looking for any sign that her words had reached him. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw his eyelids flutter, but the movement was so slight that she wondered if she had imagined it. "Jonathan, if you can hear me, I want you to know that you're not alone," she said urgently, her hand covering his. "You have people who care about you, who are waiting for you to come back. You have so much to live for, so much good you can still do in this world." The months had taught Olivia to read the subtle rhythms of Jonathan's condition, to notice changes that others might miss. She had become his most dedicated advocate, ensuring he received the best possible care and fighting for treatments that might aid his recovery. Her superiors had initially questioned her intense involvement with one patient, but her results spoke for themselves. Under her care, Jonathan's physical condition had remained stable and even improved in some areas. "I believe you're fighting to come back to us," Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I've seen your body respond to therapy, noticed how your vital signs improve when I read to you or play music. There's something inside you that refuses to give up, and I want you to know that I won't give up either." As the evening grew later, Olivia prepared to leave for the night, but she lingered beside Jonathan's bed for one final moment. In the soft glow of the medical equipment, his face looked peaceful but somehow expectant, as if he were waiting for something just beyond reach. "Sleep well, Jonathan," she whispered, gently squeezing his hand. "I'll see you tomorrow morning, and I'll have new stories to share. Sweet dreams." Walking home through the quiet streets, Olivia carried with her the same feeling that had accompanied her for months. Despite the medical uncertainty and the heartbreak of one-sided conversations, she felt certain that her connection to Jonathan Hayes was real and meaningful. She couldn't explain the depth of her feelings for a man who had never spoken to her, but she knew that caring for him had changed her in fundamental ways. The next morning would bring another day of gentle care, quiet conversations, and unwavering hope. Olivia would return to room 314 with the same dedication that had marked every day of the past 6 months. Not knowing that, Jonathan Hayes was finally beginning his journey back to consciousness, guided by the sound of a voice that had become his anchor in the darkness. The first sensation Jonathan Hayes experienced after 6 months of darkness was the sound of a woman's voice, soft and melodic, reading what seemed to be passages from a historical text. The words floated through the fog of his consciousness like distant music, familiar yet strange. His mind struggled to process the information his senses were beginning to receive, fighting against the heavy veil that had shrouded his thoughts. For so long, slowly, painfully, Jonathan became aware of his body. His limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, as if they belonged to someone else. The steady beeping of medical equipment created a rhythmic backdrop to his emerging awareness. While the scent of antiseptic and fresh flowers filled his nostrils, he tried to move, but his muscles refused to cooperate, leaving him trapped in a body that felt foreign and weak. The voice continued reading, and something about its gentle cadence drew him toward full consciousness. He had been hearing this voice in his dreams, he realized, threading through the darkness like a lifeline. It had been his constant companion during the long journey back to awareness, though he had no memory of the face that belonged to such soothing tones. With tremendous effort, Jonathan managed to flutter his eyelids. The action felt monumental, like lifting enormous weights. Light pierced through his vision in painful bursts, forcing him to close his eyes again immediately. But the small movement had been enough to alert his caregiver to the change in his condition. Jonathan? Olivia's voice carried a note of breathless hope as she noticed the subtle movement. She had been reading from a biography of Theodore Roosevelt, one of the books she had brought specifically because she thought he might appreciate stories of leadership and determination. Now, setting the book aside, she leaned closer to the bed, her heart racing with anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly and deliberately, Jonathan's eyes opened. They were deep brown, almost black, and filled with confusion as they struggled to focus on her face. Olivia felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. After months of one-sided conversations, she was finally looking into the eyes of the man she had grown to care for so deeply. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Welcome back." Jonathan's lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged. His throat felt raw and unused, his vocal cords weakened by months of silence. Olivia quickly reached for a cup of water, supporting his head gently as she helped him take small sips. The cool liquid felt like salvation against his parched throat. "Take your time," Olivia encouraged, her professional training taking over even as her heart soared with joy. "You've been asleep for a long time. 6 months, actually." "I'm Olivia, your nurse. I've been taking care of you." Jonathan's eyes tracked her movements with growing clarity. There was intelligence behind his gaze, sharp and assessing despite the obvious disorientation. He tried to speak again, and this time managed to produce a hoarse whisper. "Olivia," he repeated as if testing the name. The sound of her name spoken in his deep, rough voice sent shivers through her entire being. "Yes, that's right," she smiled, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "How do you feel? Are you in any pain?" Jonathan considered the question, taking inventory of his physical state. Everything ached with a dull, persistent throb, and his head felt heavy and clouded. But beneath the discomfort, he sensed something else, a feeling of safety and warmth that he associated somehow with the woman sitting beside him. "Your voice," he managed to say, his words becoming slightly clearer with each attempt. "I remember. Your voice." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Could hear me? All this time?" "Dreams," Jonathan whispered, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your voice was in my dreams, reading, talking, about your brother, your father, about wanting to help veterans." The revelation that he had been aware, at least on some level, of her daily visits and personal confessions left Olivia speechless. She had shared so much with his unconscious form, never imagining that somewhere in the depths of his coma, he had been listening and remembering. Dr. Rachel Kim arrived within minutes of Olivia's urgent call, bringing with her a team of specialists to evaluate Jonathan's condition. The next several hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, cognitive tests, and consultations. Throughout it all, Jonathan's eyes kept returning to Olivia, as if she were his anchor in the overwhelming, a rush of returning consciousness. Your recovery is remarkable, Dr. Kim explained to Jonathan as the initial assessments concluded. Frankly, after 6 months, we had begun to fear that you might never regain consciousness. Your brain activity had remained stable, but there were no clear signs of improvement until recently. Jonathan nodded slowly, processing the information. Fragments of memory were beginning to surface. Pieces of his life before the accident that had landed him in this medical facility, he remembered. Driving to a business meeting, discussing a new contract that would provide advanced protective equipment to military units overseas. After that, everything became hazy and unclear. What happened to me? He asked, his voice growing stronger with use. Dr. Kim exchanged a glance with Olivia before responding. You were in a severe car accident. Your vehicle went off a mountain. Rode during a storm. Took emergency responders several hours to reach you. And you had sustained significant head trauma, along with multiple other injuries. The explanation felt incomplete to Jonathan, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Something about the circumstances nagged at him, but his memories remained frustratingly fragmented. For now, he decided to focus on the present moment and the extraordinary woman who had apparently dedicated months of her life to his care. As the medical team departed and quiet turned to room 314, Jonathan found himself alone with Olivia for the first time since his awakening. The dynamic between them had shifted dramatically, and both felt the weight of unspoken emotions that had developed during his unconscious period. "Tell me about yourself," Jonathan requested, his voice still hoarse but carrying unmistakable interest. "I heard fragments in my dreams, but I want to know more about the woman who saved my life." Olivia blushed, settling back into her familiar chair beside his bed. "I don't know about saving your life. The doctors and medical equipment did that. I just tried to make sure you weren't alone." "That matters more than you know," Jonathan replied, his eyes intense despite his weakened state. "Loneliness can kill a person just as surely as any physical injury. You gave me something to hold on to when everything else was dark." Over the following days, as Jonathan's strength gradually returned, their conversations deepened and multiplied. Olivia found herself working extra shifts just to spend more time with him, fascinated by the brilliant mind that was emerging from the fog of his recovery. Jonathan was equally captivated by her gentle strength, her compassion, and the depth of character that had sustained her through months of caring for an unresponsive patient. "You mentioned your brother is in the military," Jonathan said during one of their longer conversations. "What branch does he serve in?" A shadow crossed Olivia's face, and she hesitated before responding. "Daniel was in the army. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being discharged. He's been struggling with his transition back to civilian life." Jonathan noticed the tension in her voice and the way she avoided his eyes when speaking about her brother. His experience in military leadership had taught him to read people carefully, and he sensed there was more to Daniel's story than Olivia was sharing. "Many veterans face challenges adjusting to civilian life," he said gently. "One of the reasons I focused my business on supporting active military personnel, I always felt we needed to do better for those who served." "That's admirable," Olivia replied, but her voice carried a note of strain that Jonathan couldn't ignore. "Is your brother receiving the help he needs?" Jonathan pressed, his concern genuine. Olivia looked away, struggling with emotions she had been suppressing for weeks. "Daniel has been having a difficult time. He's been involved with some people who have strong opinions about military contractors and government policies. I'm worried about the path he's on." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel James Parker, a tall, distinguished man in military uniform who entered the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His expression was serious as he approached Jonathan's bed, and Olivia immediately sensed the gravity of his visit. "General Hayes," Colonel Parker said formally, "I'm glad to see you're recovering. I'm Colonel Parker from Army Intelligence, and I need to speak with you about the circumstances of your accident." Olivia began to excuse herself, but Jonathan caught her hand gently. "Please stay," he requested, then looked at the colonel. "Olivia is someone I trust completely, and speak freely in front of her." Colonel Parker hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, General. We have reason to believe your accident was not accidental. Our investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting that your vehicle was tampered with, and we believe the attack was orchestrated by a group of disgruntled veterans who oppose military contracting policies. Jonathan's grip tightened on Olivia's hand, and she felt a chill run through her entire body. Colonel's words echoed with terrible familiarity, reminding her of the angry rhetoric she had been hearing from Daniel and his associates. "Do you have suspects?" Jonathan asked, his voice taking on a harder edge that spoke of his military background. "We're pursuing several leads," Colonel Parker replied carefully. "The group appears to be led by former military personnel who feel betrayed by what they perceive as profiteering from military conflicts. They've been vocal about targeting contractors they believe have prioritized profits over soldier safety." Olivia felt sick to her stomach. Daniel had expressed similar sentiments during their recent conversations, raging about contractors who grew wealthy while soldiers died with inadequate equipment. She had dismissed his anger as the frustration of a struggling veteran. But now she wondered if his involvement with like-minded individuals had escalated beyond mere complaints. "We'll be increasing security around your recovery," Colonel Parker continued. "There's reason to believe they may attempt to finish what they started once they learn of your recovery." Complexion and shaking hands. "Are you all right?" he asked with concern. "I need to make a phone call," Olivia replied quickly, avoiding his eyes. "I'll be back shortly." Jonathan watched her hurry from the room, his military instincts telling him that something was seriously wrong. The timing of her distress coinciding perfectly with Colonel Parker's revelation about disgruntled veterans created an uncomfortable connection in his mind. Olivia found a quiet corner of the hospital and dialed Daniel's number with trembling fingers. When he answered, she could hear voices in the background and the clink of bottles that suggested he was drinking with his companions. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth," she said without preamble. "Have you or your friends been involved in anything illegal? Anything related to military contractors?" There was a long pause before Daniel responded, and when he did, his voice was guarded. "Why are you asking, Liv?" "Because the patient I've been caring for is General Jonathan Hayes. And military intelligence just told him that his accident was actually an assassination attempt by a group of veterans opposed to military contractors." Daniel's sharp intake of breath told Olivia everything she needed to know. Her worst fears were being confirmed with each passing second of silence. "Daniel, please tell me you weren't involved in trying to kill an innocent man." "He's not innocent." "Oh." Exploded, his voice thick with alcohol and anger. "Do you know how many soldiers died because of faulty equipment his company provided? How many families destroyed so he could add another zero to his bank account?" Olivia felt the world spinning around her. "So you were involved?" "I provided information about his routines, his travel schedule. But Olivia, I swear I thought they were just going to confront him, maybe scare him. I never thought they would actually try to kill him." The phone slipped from Olivia's numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Her brother, the person she loved most in the world, had helped orchestrate the attack that had nearly killed the man she had grown to love. The cruel irony of the situation crashed over her like a wave, leaving her gasping for breath. When she finally returned to room 314, Jonathan took one look at her devastated expression and knew that his suspicions had been correct. The woman who had saved his life was connected to the people who had tried to end it. "It's your brother, isn't it?" he said quietly, his voice carrying no accusation, only sadness. Olivia nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Jonathan was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation that changed everything between them. "Did you know?" he asked finally. "Not until just now," Olivia whispered. "I suspected he was involved with people who held extreme views, but I never imagined he would participate in violence." Jonathan studied her face, seeing the genuine anguish and horror in her expression. His heart told him to comfort her, to assure her that her brother's actions didn't change his feelings. His mind, sharpened by years of military strategy and business negotiations, recognized the complexity of their situation. "I believe you," he said finally. "But Olivia, this changes everything. When Colonel Parker discovers the connection, which he inevitably will, you'll be considered a potential security risk. They might even suspect you were placed here intentionally." Implications of his words hit Olivia like physical blows. Not only had she lost the moral high ground in their relationship, but she might also face criminal charges or accusations of conspiracy, the love that had grown between them during his recovery now seemed impossible to sustain. "I should resign from your case," she said through her tears. "I should leave before this gets any worse." Jonathan reached for her hand, holding it firmly despite her attempt to pull away. "Don't make any hasty decisions. Let me think about this. Let me figure out how to handle the situation." But even as he spoke reassuring words, Jonathan felt the foundation of their relationship shifting beneath them. The trust that had developed through months of intimate care and conversation now faced its greatest test. The woman who had been his salvation during the darkest period of his life was connected to those who had put him there. As night fell over the medical center, both Olivia and Jonathan lay awake, each grappling with the devastating revelation that threatened to destroy the love that had bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. The awakening that had promised a new beginning now seemed to herald the end of everything they had discovered together. The following morning brought a storm that seemed to mirror the chaos brewing within room 314. Rain lashed against the windows. As Olivia arrived for what she feared might be her final shift caring for Jonathan, she had spent the night wrestling with her conscience. Torn between her duty to protect her brother and her love for the man whose life Daniel had helped in danger. Jonathan was already awake when she entered, his eyes following her movements as she went through her morning routine with mechanical precision. The easy intimacy they had shared just days before had been replaced by a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. "We need to talk," Jonathan said quietly as Olivia finished checking his vital signs. She nodded, settling into the chair beside his bed with reluctance. "I've been thinking all night about what to do. I think I should contact Colonel Parker myself and tell him about Daniel's involvement." "That would likely destroy your brother's life," Jonathan observed, his voice carefully neutral. "And keeping quiet might destroy yours," Olivia replied. "If there are others planning to continue what they started, you need to know everything possible to protect yourself." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Tell me about Daniel," he said finally. "Help me understand how a good man raised by someone like you could become involved in attempted murder." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she considered his request. "Daniel wasn't always angry. When he was younger, he was the most gentle person I knew. He joined the military because he wanted to serve his country, to make a difference. But when he came back from Afghanistan, something inside him had broken." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "He lost friends over there. Good. Men who died because their equipment failed, or because they didn't have adequate support. He came home carrying survivor's guilt and a rage he couldn't express in healthy ways. The VA system failed him. Jobs were impossible to find, and he started drinking." Jonathan listened without interruption, beginning to understand the pain that had driven Daniel toward extremism. "Then he met this group of other veterans who shared his anger," Olivia continued. "At first it seemed positive. They gave him a sense of purpose, a community of people who understood what he had experienced. But gradually their meetings became focused on blame and revenge rather than healing and support. And they identified me as a target," Jonathan concluded. "They convinced him that military contractors like yourself were profiting from soldier deaths. That companies deliberately provided substandard equipment to maximize profits. Daniel wanted someone to pay for the friends he lost and your success. Made you a symbol of everything he hated about the system." Jonathan absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "What Daniel and his friends don't understand is that my company has never compromised on quality for profit margins. Every piece of equipment we provide exceeds military specifications because I know what it's like to depend on gear in life or death situations." "I tried to tell him he was wrong about you," Olivia said desperately. "Even before I knew about his involvement, I could see from caring for you that you weren't the monster they painted you to be." But he wouldn't listen to reason. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices in the hallway. Through the partially open door, they could see Colonel Parker speaking urgently with Dr. Kim and several other officials. Colonel's expression was grim as he gestured toward room 314. They know, Livia whispered, her face draining of color. Colonel Parker entered the room moments later, followed by two men in civilian clothing whom he introduced as federal investigators. Their presence filled the room with an air of official authority that made both Olivia and Jonathan tense. "General Hayes, we've made significant progress in our investigation," Colonel Parker announced. "We've identified several members of the conspiracy, including the primary organizer." He turned to Olivia with a look that combined suspicion and regret. "Miss Brooks, we need to ask you some questions about your brother Daniel Brooks." Olivia felt Jonathan's hand find hers under the blanket, offering silent support even as their world crumbled around them. "I understand," she said quietly. One of the investigators stepped forward, his voice professionally detached. "Miss Brooks, were you aware of your brother's involvement with a group calling itself Veterans for Justice?" "I knew he was meeting with other veterans, but I didn't know the name of their organization or the extent of their activities," Olivia replied honestly. "Did your brother ever discuss General Hayes, or his business specifically?" Olivia hesitated, knowing that her next words would seal Daniel's fate. "Yes, he expressed anger toward military contractors in general and mentioned General Hayes by name, but I had no knowledge of any plans to harm anyone." The questions continued for nearly an hour, with investigators probing every aspect of Olivia's relationship with her brother and her assignment to Jonathan's care. Throughout the interrogation, Jonathan remained silent, his hand never leaving hers, offering what comfort he could in an impossible situation. Finally, Colonel Parker addressed the elephant in the room. "Miss Brooks, given your family connection to the conspiracy, we cannot allow you to continue in your current position. You'll need to be reassigned immediately, and there will likely be additional investigations into your background and possible involvement." Colonel Jonathan interjected, his voice carrying the authority of his military rank, despite his weakened condition. "Miss Brooks has provided exemplary care throughout my recovery. I can personally attest to her integrity and professionalism. I appreciate your confidence in her, General, but security protocols are non-negotiable. Miss Brooks represents a potential compromise to your safety." After the officials departed, Olivia began gathering her personal belongings with shaking hands. The reality of losing both her job and her connection to Jonathan was almost unbearable, but she knew there was no alternative. "This isn't how I wanted things to end between us," she said through her tears. Jonathan struggled to sit up straighter despite his physical limitations. "Olivia, look at me." When she met his eyes, she saw not anger or accusation, but a depth of understanding that took her breath away. "What your brother did was wrong," Jonathan said firmly. "But you are not responsible for his choices. You saved my life through months of dedicated care, and I will not allow their investigation to destroy you." "There's nothing you can do," Olivia protested. "The connection to Daniel makes me a liability. Even if I'm cleared of wrongdoing, the shadow of suspicion will follow me forever." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Marry me." Olivia stared at him in shock. "What did you say?" "Marry me," Jonathan repeated, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "As my wife, you'll have legal protections that will make it much harder for them to prosecute you. More importantly, it will demonstrate publicly that I have complete faith in your innocence." "Jonathan, you can't make a decision like that based on guilt or sympathy. Marriage should be about love, not legal strategy." "It is about love," Jonathan replied, his eyes intense and sincere. "I've been in love with you since I woke up and realized that your voice had been my lifeline through months of darkness. I was already planning to ask you, though I had imagined more romantic circumstances." Olivia felt her heart racing as she processed his proposal. "But your reputation, your business, everything you've worked for could be damaged by association with my family. My reputation means nothing if I lose the woman who gave me a reason to fight my way back to consciousness." Jonathan said passionately, "Olivia, you showed me what real courage looks like. You cared for me when I couldn't care for myself, and you chose to tell the truth, even when it cost you everything." The next several hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan's lawyers arrived to discuss the legal implications of his proposal. While reporters began gathering outside the medical center as news of the investigation leaked to the media. Through it all, Olivia struggled with the magnitude of the decision before her. That evening, as they sat together in the quiet of room 314, Jonathan took her hand with steady determination. "No, this isn't how either of us planned to find love," he said softly. "But sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most difficult circumstances. You taught me that during my recovery." "What about Daniel?" Olivia asked. "He'll still face charges, still be prosecuted for his involvement. We'll hire the best legal team available for his defense," Jonathan promised. "I won't pretend that. Forgiveness comes easily, but I understand the pain that drove him to make terrible choices. Maybe with proper help and support, he can find a path toward redemption." Olivia looked into Jonathan's eyes and saw not just love, but a vision of a future where healing was possible for all of them. Despite everything that had happened, despite the chaos and betrayal that surrounded them, she could envision a life where their love could flourish and where even Daniel might find peace. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with hope and determination. "I'll marry you." 3 months later, Olivia Brooks became Olivia Hayes in a small ceremony attended by close friends and Jonathan's business associates. Daniel, who had accepted a plea agreement and begun serving a reduced sentence, sent a letter of blessing from prison, finally acknowledging the good man his sister had found and expressing genuine remorse for his actions. The challenges they faced were real and ongoing. Public scrutiny, business complications, and family dynamics all tested their commitment. But the foundation they had built during those crucial months in room 314 proved unshakable. Their love had been forged in the crucible of truth and tested by the fire of betrayal, emerging stronger than either had thought possible as they stood together at the window of their new home, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant colors. Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Sometimes the greatest love stories began not with passion and romance, but with simple acts of compassion and faith in the possibility of redemption. Jonathan wrapped his arms around his wife, grateful beyond words for the woman who had refused to give up on him when he couldn't fight for himself. Their awakening had changed everything, just as the title promised. But it had led them not to destruction, but to a love that would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. In choosing truth over convenience, love over safety, and redemption over revenge, they had discovered that sometimes the most impossible circumstances can create the most extraordinary possibilities. Their story would continue, written not in the sterile environment of a hospital room, but in the full, rich tapestry of a life built on genuine love and mutual respect. The general had awakened to find not just consciousness, but purpose. Nurse had discovered not just love, but the courage to choose what was right over what was easy. Together, they proved that even the most broken situations can be transformed by the power of authentic human connection and the willingness to fight for what truly matters